A very good morning to all of you. I, Professor Bashir from IAC Government College of Education, presently working as an assistant professor in the same college. Today we will discuss one of the important topics in education, that's concept of Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy of instructional objectives. Benjamin Bloom from the University of Chicago, along with his collaborators, they published the Taxonomy of Instructional Objectives, the classification, how to classify those instructional objectives. It was revised by Lauren Anderson in the year 2001 and was published with the title called as Taxonomy for Teaching, Learning and Assessment. Bloom's taxonomy is more accurately referred to as I said before, taxonomy of learning objectives. Now, what are the learning objectives and what we understand by taxonomy? How to classify? As I said before, taxonomy means classifying. In this Bloom's taxonomy, the Bloom wanted to classify those instruction objectives, those learning objectives which the teacher teaches. Now, first of all, in order to understand the Bloom's taxonomy, what are the learning objectives? Learning objectives are the statements that describe what a student is expected to learn from the lesson. So, learning objectives are those statements that describe that what students will learn at the end of the lesson. That means whenever the teacher is teaching, the teacher has some objective that has to be at the end of the lecture that has to be done. So, those learning objectives the teacher frames before entering the classroom. For example, if a teacher wants to teach a verb, so the teacher is entering a classroom, wants to teach something, the teacher here wants to teach the verb. So, what are the learning objectives? The learning objectives here will be that at the end of the lecture, the teacher is expecting that the students will learn the definition of verb, the examples and the sentences of verb. So, the learning objective means that those statements that student is expected to learn at the end of the lesson. The teacher might teach any topic, but before entering the classroom, the teacher has that objective that at the end of the class, the learner will learn the particular thing. So, the learning objectives are framed before, and Bloom tried to classify those objectives in order to make the learning more effective. So, the taxonomy of the instructional objective is a hierarchy. It's a hierarchy and Bloom make a pyramid. The higher order learning and the lower order learning. So, in the hierarchy, what's important? It's meant that learning and the higher level is dependent on the lower level. So, this means that taxonomy is like a pyramid. The taxonomy is like a pyramid with the lower levels that act as a building blocks. Like when you reach at the higher level, it's important that you have accomplished the lower levels. So, the lower levels act as a building blocks to allow the learner to attain the higher levels of educational functioning. As I said, the higher order learning and the lower order learning. So, in order to reach at the higher level, first the learner has to learn at the lower level. The learner has to first attain those stepwise learning. First he will learn at lower level and then he will reach at the higher level of learning. That's why it's called a hierarchy. So, in Bloom's taxonomy, there are three, we usually call as, there are three domains: cognitive domain, affective domain and the psychomotor domain. There are three domains of learning: the cognitive domain of learning, the affective domain of learning and the psychomotor domain of learning. So, that's called the three heads. What are the three heads? The head, the heart and the hand. The head is our cognitive domain. The affective domain is the heart and the psychomotor domain is the hand. So, the head, according to Bloom, the head, that is the cognitive domain, the heart, that is the affective domain and the hand, that's the psychomotor domain, should work together. So learning takes place when head, heart and hand are working collaboratively with each other. So we cannot skip head part, we cannot skip the cognitive part. We have to take the cognitive part along with affective, along with psychomotor, in order to make the learning effective. Like the Gandhi said, education of head, heart and hand. So the head part, that is a cognitive domain. The cognitive domain, now what is the cognitive domain? Cognitive domain, as I said, it's linked with a head part. The head means your brain. So the learning objectives here will be linked with our head part, the brain part. Those intellectual skills, through our brain we think, we reason, the problem solving, that will range from lower to higher. At lower levels, we acquire knowledge, we acquire understanding, but at a higher levels, when we reach at a higher level, we create, we analyze, we synthesize, we evaluate. So in cognitive domain, the objectives are linked with the head part, the thinking part, the reasoning part, the problem solving part, the creative part, knowledge and development of intellectual skills. And the second is affective domain. The affective domain is linked with the heart part. It's linked with our feelings. It's linked with our emotions. So whenever we learn, not only cognition, because usually what we think that in our learning only cognition is important. Our thinking is important. Our reasoning is important. Our creative abilities are important. But according to Benjamin Bloom, it's not only our cognition, not only cognition is involved whenever we learn, or whenever we understand some concept, or whenever we acquire knowledge, but affective domains, the feeling parts are also involved. So if there is not if feelings are not involved, it's not a proper learning. Both cognitive, these three domains, the cognitive, affective, psychomotor, they should work together. So whenever we learn, we should learn properly. We should attach our feelings with it. Like we learn how to, how to save water, and if we don't save the water, we just learn the saving part of water. But we don't save water in a practical sense. That means the affective domain is not involved in this kind of learning. So cognitive domain is involved, affective domain is involved, and the third is psychomotor domain, which was earlier called as a cognitive domain. In this type of domain, the activities, the physical and motor skill abilities are involved. Those activities when we learn with the help of our motor abilities, not only our head that we learn in cognitive domain. Whenever we learn, not only our cognition, our mind is involved, but our emotions are involved. In addition to emotion, when we learn, some kind of active abilities, physical activities are involved with us. So Bloom classified those objectives into three categories: the cognitive activity, the affective activity and the psychomotor activity. And Bloom believed that learning takes place when three domains work together: the head, the heart and the hand. Moving back to the next slide, like as I said, the domains of Bloom's taxonomy: the psychomotor domain, the affective domain and the cognitive domain. The cognitive domain, as I said, it's linked with the mental skills and knowledge, the mind part, the head part, the brain part, linked with our mental skills and knowledge. The affective is more kind of attitude towards learning, feelings, and the psychomotor is a manual part which involves the physical skills. So these are the three domains which Bloom's classified in three categories in order to make those learning objectives clear. The first domain that we will discuss today is cognitive domain. Now what is cognitive domain? What's cognition? Cognition, it involves knowledge and the development of intellectual skills. So cognitive domain, it involves acquiring knowledge. That is the first level in the hierarchy. It's now called as a remembering. And the development of intellectual skills. So this domain it involves both acquiring the knowledge and the development of cognitive mental abilities, and those abilities can range to lower to higher. At lower level, we have simple basics just to understand something, just knowledge. Then to comprehend, it starts with knowledge, the lower level of thinking, the knowledge part, the understanding part, and the application part. So the cognitive domain, there are three levels, three lower levels in the hierarchy. The first is knowledge. Now when it was revised in 201, now knowledge is called as remembering. Then it's understanding, comprehension. Then it's application. The three lower levels in hierarchy. Then in the three lower levels of hierarchy, there are HOTS, that the higher order thinking, the HOTS of learning. So what are the HOTS of learning? These acquire higher cognitive mental abilities. So what are the higher cognitive mental abilities? These are, it's analysis. Then in the earlier model it was analysis, synthesis. In 1956 it was analysis, synthesis and evaluation. But when it was revised in 201, now it's analysis. Then it's analysis, it's analyzing, then evaluating and then creating. So if we look to cognitive domain, there are the two versions, the old version and the new version. The old version, in old version, as I said, it includes three lower levels: knowledge, now called as remembering; comprehension, earlier now called as understanding; application, now called as applying. These three in the hierarchy, in the pyramid, these are the lower levels of thinking. And these lower levels, so after completing one step, these lower level of thinking, the person reaches at higher level of thinking. That are the HOTS of the learning. This analysis, now called as analyzing; synthesis, now called as evaluating; and evaluation, now called as creating. So earlier the synthesis was at 5th step, now evaluating is at 5th step. The last step was evaluation in the old model. In the new model, the last step, which was earlier called as synthesis, now is its last step, called as creating. So the cognitive domain, it inquires both higher and lower. So first it starts with knowledge, and when we pass through this cognitive domain, it reaches to the development of intellectual skills that range from higher and that range from lower, the higher to lower, the lower to higher. This includes the recall, when we recall something in the knowledge domain, the recognition of specific facts, the procedure plans and concepts that serve in the development of intellectual abilities and skills. So in the cognitive domain, what it includes the recall, the recognition of specific facts, the knowledge part, the procedural patterns and concepts that serves in the development. So when a person develops the intellectual ability, so those learning objectives come from the cognitive domain, which includes, it starts with the recall part, the knowledge part, and it then goes to the framing of concepts, then creating something new. So this in cognitive domain, those instructional objectives are linked with cognition. It's linked with the head part, it's linked with the brain. So those learning objectives in the cognitive domain will be linked with our head part, the mind part, the thinking part. As we can see in the slide, we have as we have discussed it also, the old version part and the new version part. So today we will discuss those cognitive domain, the levels of the cognitive domain. So what are the levels of the cognitive domain? The cognitive domain has 6 levels. We'll start with the knowledge part. The knowledge, in the previous model, in the model 1956, when Bloom framed the instructional objectives, it was called the knowledge. Now it was revised in 201, it's called as a remembering. So what's now knowledge? What's knowledge? What do you mean by knowledge? And how to frame? This thing is not, we have to only understand that what's knowledge here, we have to frame the instructional objectives. How will frame? Instructional objective is linked with knowledge. Knowledge simply means, it means the recall. the recall, the recognition of facts and specifics. It means when we recall something, it starts, so this is the first level of thinking at cognitive domain, where we have to just remember something. A child of 3-year age can remember what's noun. And when we will ask him a simple question that can you define the noun, he can also say yes, noun is the name of person, it's the name of place, it's the name of a thing. So he would actually understand that because he is too younger to understand that what is noun. He had just remembered that. And when we will ask him to just define noun without understanding the concept, he will define the noun. So we can say he has remembered, he has acquired the knowledge of noun. But he has not comprehended that because he is too younger for that. So at knowledge level, we have a simple, at knowledge level, at remembering level, the children or the learner is supposed to just acquire knowledge of something. You can know the name of the countries, the name of the states, how many continents are there, who is the president of that. And usually usually we label him that he is quite knowledgeable, who is quite intelligent. Why? Because he had just knowledge. So Bloom said no, knowledge comes at the first level. Just mere remembering the fact, it doesn't mean you have acquired cognitive mental ability. This comes at the first step. So when we have to define the action verbs, because when Bloom's taxonomy was revised, everything was defined in its verb technology, in its verb terminology, like when we define now the action verbs of the knowledge domain, in the knowledge domain, what do we have to do? Have to frame the instruction objectives. The teacher will say name, define, label, recall, recognize, state, identify, list. So when your question simply what is? So what is this? You are remembering something. So you are using knowledge domain. So the teacher is deliberating something, but he or she is assessing here the knowledge domain when she is enlisting the questions like to name something, to define something, to label something, to recall something, to recognize something, to state and to identify. So this is knowledge domain. And then comes at the second level, there is comprehension. Earlier it was called as comprehension, but now it's called as the understanding. So what's comprehension? What's understanding? So knowledge domain, the learner just memorized something, just remembered something. It might be learning the mathematics, learning alphabets, learning just tables, learning the name of continents, learning the noun, verb, adjective. But in the comprehension part, the learner not only acquires knowledge, but he understands those concepts. At this level, the learner does not only say 2 plus 2 is 4, but he understands that when we add 2 plus 2, it becomes 4. The learner not only just memorizes what is noun, but now he can say, yes, this is noun. Noun is person, it's place. He understands those concepts. So that means when a student can write in his own words something what he has learned. So knowledge is more kind of a rote memory, the cramming part. You have crammed something. But an understanding, when a learner is able to write something, is able to define something, that means he has not acquired only knowledge, he has understood that concept. So when we put that comprehension domain in its action verbs, we can say it's describe, it's to classify, is to explain, is to select, is to paraphrase, is to identify and express. So in comprehension level, the verbs that are used is to describe. When the teacher asks a question like when he or she checks, like how, describe, classify, explain, can you explain this concept? Now can you describe this concept? Can you classify the categories? Can you identify? That means the teacher is assessing your comprehension part. In the earlier level, the teacher was just assessing your knowledge domain when she was just asking you simple question, can you recall that? Can you recognize that? Can you say? But when the teacher describes something, wants you to describe something, wants you to explain something, identify something, the teacher is assessing your comprehension part. That you have, in addition to you have acquired knowledge, have you comprehended this topic? And when you are able to describe it, when you are able to identify it, when you are able to classify it, it means that you have acquired comprehension level. The third level is the application part. Application, as the name indicates, is applying the knowledge in new situations. Applying acquired knowledge, facts, techniques and rules. When you acquire the knowledge, when you have acquired the knowledge at the level 1, then you have at level 2, you have comprehended the knowledge. In the third step, you will apply that knowledge in the practical life situation. You have learned in the level 1 the numbers 1, 2, 3. In the level 2, you are now able to understand that 2 plus 2 or 3 plus 3 means 6, 2 plus 2 means 4. By when we add 3 to 3, it becomes 6. In the third step, application part, now you are applying that knowledge. Now you are going to a market, you can add, you can make your chart, and then you will see, you will see that if I will add this one, I have to get some more money for it. Now we are applying the knowledge that you have learned in the first step. In the second step, you have comprehended that knowledge. In the third step, when we apply that knowledge in the practical life situation, then we can say we have acquired the third level of cognitive domain. That's the application part. And the action verbs, in order to assess now how the learner reached the level of application, the teacher will ask the questions like apply. Now, can you apply, just apply this or solve this, illustrate this, organize this, use it. When the teacher will use those action verbs in order to assess the application level, and if the learner is able to do this, then we can say the learner has reached the application level. So the first level is the knowledge level, that is acquiring the knowledge. Second is comprehension, the understanding level, when we understand a concept. And the third is the application part, that when we will use the knowledge in a new situation. Level 4 is the analysis. Level 4 is the analysis. So these three that we discussed before, that was knowledge, comprehension, and the third is application. These are the lower level of thinking according to Bloom. And as per the Bloom, now we will start with the other three levels of thinking, and this is usually we call it as the HOTS of learning, that higher order mental abilities, higher order thinking. So the first level we will discuss here is analysis part. So analysis, it's breaking down the material into several parts. So when the material, what we have discussed or what we have acquired knowledge, we have comprehended that and we have applied that. When you break that knowledge, when you break the material, any learning material, when it's break into several parts, we reach at the analyzing part. So for example, if the teacher is teaching the micro teaching, that is a traditional, that is an old method of teaching. And when the learner compares, and when the teacher compares that micro teaching with the traditional method of teaching, the teacher is breaking the components, like by saying that in micro teaching we have 5 minutes class, we have 5 skills, we have the students are only 5, the teaching time is only 5 to 10. So in order to understand the concept, what the teacher is doing, the teacher is breaking the learning material into several parts. So in analyzing, in analyzing the learning material in order to understand the concept, the learning material is broken down in parts in order to understand it. So the action verbs, in order to assess that has the learner acquired the analysis part, the action verbs that will be used is analyze, to illustrate, to compare between the two, breaking down the concept into parts in order to understand it, to contrast, to diagram, to differentiate. Can you differentiate between the two concepts? Now we are teaching a concept, we are teaching a new concept, we are teaching a new method, project method. Can you differentiate it with the traditional method? So breaking down the learning material into parts to discriminate, to distinguish and to separate. And the action verbs here will be used like this. And when the learner is able to discriminate, when the learner is able to analyze, when the learner is able to separate, so we can say the learner has reached to the level of analysis. The fifth level, that is also in the higher order thinking, that's evaluation. In the previous model of Bloom's taxonomy, the evaluation comes at the last pyramid. At the pyramid, it was at the last level. But now when it was revised in 2001, the evaluation is at the fifth level. So in evaluation, when we have analyzed it when we have compared between the two concepts, now a learner has reached to the level that where he can come to a conclusion, where he can generalize, where he can judgment that which one is the better. Is the traditional method better or is the new method, project method is better? So in judgment, when a person gives reasons, he can generalize the things, he can make judgments about the work, ideas or information. So that is the evaluation part. So when we have analyzed it, when we have compared between the two concepts, when we have differentiated between the concepts, in evaluation we can make a judgments about the concept. So in order to assess that has this instructional objective achieved, the action verbs will be used like appraise, defend, rate, evaluate, judge, support and critic. Now, usually at the end of the topic we usually say that how can you critically evaluate between the concepts, can you critically evaluate the education commissions or any other concept. So when we say the critical evaluation means the merits, the demerits and then coming to a conclusion. So according to Bloom, you can reach at this level, at the fifth level, when we have acquired the analysis part. So when you have learned something, you have compared between the two concepts. In the evaluation part, you have reached to the level where you can make a judgments, where you can judge, where you can critically evaluate, where you can reach to the conclusion about the concept. That's the fifth level as per the 201 revised model of Bloom, that evaluation comes at the fifth level. The sixth level is the creating part, which earlier was called as synthesis, but when it was revised, it's called as a creating, and it comes at the last level of hierarchy. At a higher order thinking, according to Bloom, the last level of thinking, of cognition is creating. So what's creating now? Creating, its ability to combine elements, to form a whole or create something new. So when a person has an ability to create a whole, so in analyzing we were breaking parts, but in creating, the earlier which was called as synthesize, in creating you are combining the elements, and when we are combining the elements we are creating something new. That's creativity. You are creating some novel ideas. You have learned a concept and now you are creating a hypothesis. Now you can write a poem because you have acquired the knowledge, you have understood that, you have applied that, you have analyzed that, you have evaluated its contribution, you have come to a conclusion. Now at the last level of hierarchy, you are creating something new. You are presenting a novel idea. So according to Bloom, this is the higher level of a thinking in cognition domain, where a learner creates a new idea, and how he creates new idea, where every parts are combined. So the action verbs here used are in creating level are to arrange, to assemble, to create, to organize, to design, to develop, to compose, to manage and plan. So how the teacher will assess that has the learner now acquired the creating level. So the action verb will use. If the learner is able to arrange the concept, if the learner is organized, or if the learner is able to develop a new concept, he is able to compose or plan a new concept, then we can say he has acquired at the last level in the hierarchy of cognitive domain. That is the creating part. So this is, dear learners, this is all for today. Today we have discussed Bloom's taxonomy in its cognitive domain. Inshallah, in the next lectures we will discuss the other domains of taxonomy of instructional objectives, the domains of instructional objectives, the affective domain as well as the psychomotor domain. This is all for today. Thank you very much.